Hi everyone, welcome to this tour of my layout. This is what we're going to be covering today. And the TH&B, of course, what we call a fallen flag railroad. Those started in the late 1800s. It fell into financial difficulties in the 1970s, like so many railroads, and was eventually taken over by its principal owner, the Canadian Pacific Railroad. By 1987, it had been completely absorbed into the CP operation. This is the TH&B route as it was originally designed and built in the late 1800s, and I modeled the Welland Subdivision and the Dunnville Subdivision. So welcome to the room. If you missed this sign and kept on walking, you'd start the tour very badly. This is a duck under as you would enter the room. If you take a peek over, this is what you'd see. So let's orient you to the room. From front to back, left to right, it's 22 feet long. In about the middle, it is 6 feet, 2 inches wide. At the back end, it's about 5'7" wide. And the bump out that you see at the top of the picture, that accommodates a 48-inch diameter helix, among other structures for the layout. The outside wall provides those limitations. The rest of the constraint are adjoining rooms. And we've put a pocket door in on the left-hand side to save space. Here are the basic facts of the layout, and I'll just let you have a read through that. This is my second layout. My first one, like so many of us, was a layout built to be built. I hadn't really thought about what I was going to do with it at all. However, it was focused on the TH&B. This new layout really benefits from a lot of thought and a realization that you can and could do more with a layout than just build it. And I've been discovering the joys of operating a layout ever since, and have been getting a lot of help learning about how to do that in the last 3 to 4 years. So if you came in through the doorway and under the duck under, this is what you would see. On my right is the lower deck, 41 inches as noted. You get to see the essentially the color scheme that we're using with the painting of the track between the main line and the different yards. At the upper area at 61 inches is the shelf design for the upper deck. Lower deck, I should say as well, it uses a sectional design that was talked about in one of the combat books by Pele Sodberg. Behind me, in addition to the duck under, the next level down, this is a drop down gate, which allows the incline to move across the break. And the incline serves two purposes. It allowed the helix to be a shorter structure rather than entering at the lower deck level. Trains enter and exit partway up, essentially halfway up. And the incline also serves the purpose of standing in for the Niagara Escarpment, which is such a dominant physical presence in Hamilton as well as the entire Niagara Peninsula. Right behind me at my left elbow is a swing-in gate, and this connects the front end of the lower deck. At the opposite end, it simply has a 36-inch radius curve at the back end of the room. This is the track plan for the lower and upper decks, and you'll see it again a little bit later. So as you're standing in the room, as I was a moment ago in that slide, on your right-hand side would be in the foreground Chatham Yard, which was essentially the servicing facility for the TH&B. It housed originally a water tower and a roundhouse, long gone, as well as a coaling tower, which is what is going to be positioned here, which for the modern fleet still provides sanding service to locomotives. We didn't have space for the roundhouse or for the turntable that was originally there. Starting partway back and running into the background is Kinnear Yard. It's the largest on the layout, and by the late 1970s, it essentially become the operating hub, replacing Aberdeen Yard in that capacity. As you see it there, it has 10 sidings, and most of those are double-ended off of 2 ladders, and it has a capacity for 150-foot cars. On the opposite side of the aisle is Fisher Yard, which is essentially a marshalling servicing yard for the industrial complex along the Hamilton waterfront. The Fisher Yard, as I've modeled it, has 7 sidings and has capacity for 99 50-foot cars. As well, under tape, because of work that I've been doing along the backdrop in this section, is the industrial belt line, which reaches a number of industries that you'll be introduced to later that are along this back wall and in the back corner. On your left, in this jog area underneath the upper deck, is Stelco. This is Coil Yard, which is on the upper deck on your right-hand side as you would enter the room with the door at your back. Coil Yard is in Welland, Ontario. As I've modeled it, it has 6 sidings and a capacity for 39 50-foot cars. It also has an engine ready and a caboose standby track. On the back wall here with a lighter colored ballast is the CN Welland to Port Colborne division line. We have 2 staging yards. One, which I won't be showing you, is underneath the helix. It stands in for the John Street CP yard in Toronto. This in the adjoining gym. And our house is Frontier Yard in Buffalo and Montrose Yard in Niagara Falls, both which provided through traffic into the TH&B system in the Niagara Peninsula. So let's run some trains, shall we? Just talking about how we conceive the overall layout before we started construction. Lots of doodling, can't recommend it highly enough. In the upper left, you'll see a cross section of the sectional design based on the Sodborg, as well as the portable modules that make up the lower deck. And you'll see in this particular diagram in the middle bottom just how they come together around the room. So some basic operational facts were really, really helpful in terms of planning the electrical side of the work before it got underway. Lots of resource material. I've had access to some really great people at the TH&B Historical Society, as well as people that have worked on not only the TH&B, but also the very important operation in Stelco. Just let you read down through that. Big part of the anticipation of the electrical draw for this railroad is not just the number of trains that moved and could potentially move concurrently with a number of operators on each of the decks, but the fact that by the 1970s, the size of cars was increasing dramatically, and the TH&B's original locomotives, which were all GP7s and 9s, road switchers, simply had a great deal of difficulty handling the loads, particularly up and down the escarpment. So all of the trains that you see in photographs are running as many as 5 engine consists. So now some of the time these were helpers that were dropped off, but nevertheless, if I was going to try to model the prototype, I was going to need sufficient power. So this is what we came up with. The key things at the bottom, that each one of the decks is its own district, completely isolated from the other with its own separate booster. And then each of these in turn is divided into 5 zones. Each zone is protected by its own electronic circuit breaker. And this system has worked extremely well. We chose the NCE system for DCC operation, although what was very much dominant when I arrived in the Kitchener-Waterloo area in 2014 was Digitrax. This is how we set things up then. I purchased a ready-made kitchen cabinet box, and we've filled it with the gear. The space that's open at the bottom is going to be for the electronic control system for some of the turnout control based on a Raspberry Pi with its own power supply. The Swiss cheese holes that you see along the side are primarily for the wiring for the turnout control for the Raspberry Pi system. And you see the breakers along the one side of the panel. This is a removable shelf at the back of the box, which has the 2 NCE boosters, and also added in from my old DC layout, my original layout, an MRC power pack for auxiliary power. The outside of the box, the setup has a parallel setup on the wall behind it. There are these terminal strips that you see here. All of the breakers are wired into that. Everything is labeled, and then a separate piece of cabling, 14 gauge, as I noted, runs from here back to the mating strip on the back wall. And this provides strain relief so that you can pull this out and not have to worry about yanking things out of the circuit breakers or other critical connections. And the wires are individually labeled, as well as where they connect onto the terminal strips at both ends. Stations around the layout for, as noted in the fact sheet, up to 4 operators, could be more, but it gets a little crowded in a room as small as mine. Each station has these plastic storage units for the small clipboards that we use. One of the things I like about JMRI is minimal paperwork. And there will be additional holders for uncoupling skewers and for pencils and things like that. A little bit of the underneath that most people don't see, but of interest to modelers. We started off with suitcase connectors on the left, found them to be unreliable, and with good advice from Graham McDonald, MMR, went back to the handy, trustworthy, or perhaps not as sexy terminal barrier strips, everything labeled. These are the mini panels that I've started to install this fall past for controlling the tortoise switch machines. Anything that's beyond 2.5 foot reach from the fascia is going to have some form of a mechanical or electrical control for the turnouts. These are the servos. which will be powered through the Raspberry Pi. And as noted a moment ago, anything that's hard to reach will be assigned to these, if not one of the other assist systems for managing the turnouts. On one of the, I guess it was a 2019 tour with the NMRA WOD, the layout owner kept repeating, there are no square corners in nature. And so finally I bit the bullet last fall under COVID conditions and had access to some flashing and fixed the square corner problem. One of the things I like about having decided to move into the late 1970s and then on up to 1981 for operation is the wide range of schemes that applied the Niagara Peninsula and certainly into the TH&B Coil and Kinnear yards. So let's take a look at some of the structures as I built them in the past and will be incorporated on the layout if they're not there now. Typical structures as you might see them along a rail line through an urban area that's seen better days. Those of you who attended the recent WOD clinic by Bernard Helen of mini prints saw some of his exquisite work. I had purchased these ahead of time. So here you have a fox scaring up a male mallard while his companion seeks shelter or protection out of sight behind the beaver lodge. And just a reminder of how exquisitely small these figures are that Bernard's 3D resin printer is manufacturing. He does really amazing work. And across the main line, a mallard pair are looking for a nesting site. This scene is intended, it's about 4 inches wide at its largest. It's essentially a transition between two large industrial scenes. On the upper left, Coal Yard, which is in Welland, and in the lower right, Robin Hood Mill, which is in Port Colborne, excuse me. This tool house is from my old layout and has found what will probably be its permanent home along the upper deck. Well, with an operating layout, you need lots of customers, and I've started that process of providing them. This is what will be or is now on the upper deck. This mill is still in operation. This photograph was taken in October of 2019 while I was on my way to a TH&B Historical Society meeting. And I've started to scratch build it. The silo structure, massive, massive affair. This model weighs about 5 pounds and is 19 inches long by 16 inches high. And then I started to mock up the milling building as well as the rest of the structure, the loading bays, and the administration building will be my next part of the project. This fall past, I did up the loading bay floor and scratch built a unloading chute. In Port Maitland, essentially the main reason why the Dunnville subdivision was created was partly to import coal by ferry across Lake Erie, but also to service this industry once it got going. Airco was a fertilizer producer, eventually purchased in the late 1970s by International Minerals. And I'll be scratch building this portion of it. Generated huge amounts of traffic, which included these two trains. The acid train at the bottom, you've already seen my version of it, came in on a fairly regular basis, but as a special from Coppercliff. And the rock train brought phosphate rock up from Florida. Huge deposits in that state. I have a friend I've known for quite a number of years. So when who used to work for Atlas Steel, about 40-year career there. So when I decided to add Atlas Steel to the upper deck, I had a ready source of really good information. And I've just recently completed a mock-up of what I'm able to fit onto that corner of the layout. This is a Google Global View image of part of the facility. This part, by the way, is still in production today, although under different ownership. And that's what's going to be eventually the Atlas Steel complex. Lots of traffic. Lower deck has an even larger number of customers squeezed in, with Stelco in the upper left underneath the helix, and underneath the upper deck as well, being the major customer, feeding steel to many of these industries, although not American can, by the way. Starting last September, with the help of a gentleman I've come to know in Stony Creek, Ron Tuff, MMR. Ron was the yard master for Stelco and has been incredibly generous with information and his time. One of the things he did was to take a look at my track plan, which I provided him for Stelco, and said simply, I think you could do better. And all the red that you see are the changes that he suggested to the layout. And it really has improved operating the Stelco area much more efficient, and also a lot more interesting. You can see the number of mills on the right-hand side that we're going to squeeze in. Camera shows the area that is included there. This is the first building that I've been working on for the Stelco complex. And with the help of Jim Sloan and Sarnia, I now have a steel blast furnace. And it's going to go here. The Amtrak engine will eventually be painted as a Stelco switcher. And you can see some of the scars on the sub-road bed from where track originally was in the earlier track plan. One of the things about changing dates on a layout as you build a new one is what you do with space that has to be repurposed. I originally was going to have a Studebaker auto plant, which had been a major fixture in Hamilton for a number of years, in one corner. That was no longer in production in the late 1970s. So discovered that CP had approached TH&B in the 1960s about tearing out track in this part of Forest Avenue and turned it into a container yard, which you could see if the map disappeared. Anyway, we're going to have a container yard, and the picture that's partly obscured in the upper left is as it appeared in the late 1960s. The Westinghouse plant, number 3, is one of a number in the city, as you can tell. And we're going to be fitting this part of it into one corner of the lower deck as well. And National Steel Car, I've gotten to know a man who, through the TH&B Historical Society, who still works there. So he's been a great deal of help in terms of pictures and information. So we're going to model this as a backdrop building. So let's talk a little bit about how we operate on the layout, shall we? We've run about a dozen sessions since I started building the layout. There's lots of traffic in and out of the businesses. This is just an example of traffic carrying inputs. And as you can appreciate, to carry a lot of this, specialty cars are needed. So more variety is coming onto the layout as a result of the research I'm doing and things I'm learning about the industries past and present in the Niagara Peninsula. One of the many little bits of trivia I've learned quite by accident in the last 2 years is Columbia Chemicals. If you'd asked me in 2015 what's carbon black used for, I wouldn't have had a clue. And it turned out, by attending a international division session a couple of years ago, Columbia Chemicals was shipping to another industry that I decided I would add to the upper deck, and that's Union Carbide. So there's lots of cross traffic on the layout, which is excellent. And one of the things I've learned, in addition to the creative activity that's involved with operating a layout as close as you can to the real world, is that you can essentially stage or program activity much like you were running a play in a theater. So the two staging yards act very much as the wings of the theater, and we have JMRI helping us to manage the on-stage activity. I chose JMRI for a number of reasons. Nothing wrong with the other systems, but I did find and do find at times that handling all of the car cards to be a bit undaunting. I've spent some time operating on another chap's layout, Pete Mulvaney in Waterloo, and he uses as well a software system. And I like the feel of being able to just get everything that I need as a conductor or an operator off of a single sheet of paper. So JMRI computer program requires databases to be built up, and you get the output and a single sheet of paper for your switch lists. And you'll note here, I did brought a smile to my face in a way. March the 16th, 2020 is the very last operating session that we've had on the layout since COVID began. So a bit of a milestone. Well, that's the tour. Let's go watch trains again, shall we?
One length, half a length, 20, 10. You're coupled. You can reverse away. Thank you for watching this virtual tour of our layout.